So the mostly peaceful lull in hostilities became a little less peaceful yesterday when the U.S., along with the Saudis, carried out strikes against Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. Iraq's paramilitary Popular Mobilization Forces, dominated by Iranian-backed Shia militias, said at least 20 of its members were killed in the U.S.-Saudi strikes on its bases. And, you know, the Saudis are also taking incoming from the Iranian-backed Houthis out of Yemen as well earlier this week. And this came hours after CENTCOM had said that Iran launched missiles against U.S. forces targeting a command center, U.S. Air Base and command center in Jordan. All those missiles were intercepted. Trump was on with Fox and Friends yesterday talking about what may come next, including strikes against the nuclear facility at Pickaxe Mountain if a deal cannot be reached. And the whole if a deal cannot be reached, I don't even know what that sounds or looks like. And even if it sounded or looked like a deal, how could you trust it?
Satellite imagery and intel indicates that Iran is actively constructing and fortifying Pickaxe Mountain. How will we respond?
Well, I don't need Bibi to tell me that. Bibi's telling me that because he wants me to stay involved. I mean, I don't necessarily. We have the finest, because of Space Force, we have the greatest cameras in the world focused on. We know exactly what's going on. But, no, I heard Bibi announce that. I said, why don't you just tell it to me? Why do you have to announce it to the world? I know exactly what's going on at Pickaxe. It's not a big problem. We took out their nuclear sites, and we'll have to take out Pickaxe if we don't make a deal. If we don't make a deal, we'll take it out very easily.
Right.
Very easily. I suppose I question that, because if you could have taken it out very easily, then why haven't you done so thus far? Why didn't you do so with Midnight Hammer last year, June? Why haven't you done so in terms of the identified military strikes if it's so easy? I mean, I understand Trump's penchant for hyperbole, but doesn't mean that he shouldn't be challenged with sobriety. Kenneth Pollack is the vice president for policy at the Middle East Institute. He joins us now. Kenneth Pollack, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Ken. Good to be with you again. How are you?
Good to have you. So, first of all, the hostilities yesterday and the concerns about the escalation of the conflict, not just between the U.S. and Iran, but regionally with, as I mentioned, the Houthis more engaged against the Saudis, these paramilitary forces in Iraq that were hit by a combination of U.S. and Saudi strikes yesterday. What's your handle on the prospect that this becomes a regional conflagration, to be hyperbolic myself, but this is some of the concerns that have been expressed?
So, look, it already is a regional conflagration. I mean, there's no question about it. We've got fighting going on all across the Middle East. I think, the real great question is, how much is that going to escalate? How bad could it get? And the honest answer is, of course, that we don't know. Neither the U.S. nor our allies, nor really the Iranians, want more fighting. We all just want to get our way. And the problem is that, in the great Venn diagram of what we and our allies want and what the Iranians want, not that there's any overlap whatsoever. And, this is the problem that we face, is that both sides don't really want to go at it with each other again for their own reasons, but neither is willing to give on their position. And this is why the president has found himself in such a bind, because his options right now, he can continue with the blockade, and we should all hope that the blockade is actually going to cause the Iranians to change their minds and make some serious compromises. But, that's going to be a long shot. Blockades take a very long time. We should always remember that the new leadership in Tehran is not terribly interested in their economy, not terribly interested in the suffering of their people, willing to bear pain for long periods of time. And so if the blockade isn't going to work, and again, I think it's a long shot to work quickly, then you only got two real options out there. You can either make concessions to the Iranians, which would be absolutely tragic and horrific and disastrous, or you can massively escalate. And that, too, is going to be incredibly problematic and clearly not something that President Trump wants to do.
Well, to your point, Iran rejected a proposal from Oman to evenly divide control of the strait. They want more control than the Omanis would ostensibly have, even if that's something that we signed off on, but it didn't get to that stage. So it speaks to sort of what you were saying, and clearly Iran's posture, which is almost daring Trump to escalate.
Yeah, exactly. And what we should also keep in mind, you did a nice job of laying out all the different things that have gone on just in the past few days around the region. And we got to recognize that while we tend to focus on the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, or between the U.S. and Iran indirectly through the Omanis and the Pakistanis and the other mediators, the Iranians are conducting simultaneous negotiations with all of our allies in the Gulf and probably the Jordanians and maybe some others as well. The Iranians are trying to extract all kinds of concessions. And we should always remember, the Iranian regime is a criminal enterprise. They have been engaged in massive blackmail for 47 years, right? Since taking our hostages. They hold hostages for ransom. They now have the best hostage in the world in the Strait of Hormuz, and they're trying to extract concessions from all of our allies, basically massive cash payments. And so while some of what's going on is directly about us, in many cases what the Iranians are often doing is they're really trying to put pressure on our allies in these sidebar negotiations. So much is going on because so much is going on diplomatically.
Well, so how important is it to keep our erstwhile allies, some who are clearly allies of convenience, in the fold? How important is it for Trump to make a demonstration of commitment, say, for example, the issue of Pickaxe Mountain? And obviously all of these countries are watching and listening to what the president says too. And if they see a disconnect between his saber rattling and his ability and his willingness to actually unsheathe the saber, then that becomes problematic for his credibility. So, is there a demonstration consistent with our objectives, like no nuclear weapons program, and specifically Pickaxe Mountain, since that's still a pending or an open issue? Is there a demonstration that is important to make with respect to that facility?
Yeah. So first, I want to say you've got it exactly right, which is that what our allies have seen over the course of this war is the U.S. not be willing to do what they didn't want us to get into this war, and when we got into the war and they got dragged into it, they want us to take out the Iranian regime. It's clear we're not going to be willing to do that. So you're exactly right. They want a demonstration of American resolve that we're not going to abandon them to Iranian blackmail. Now, is Pickaxe Mountain the target that they really have in mind? Probably not. I think these strikes that we've been mounting, these retaliatory attacks that we've been mounting, they absolutely are what the Gulf allies and our other allies in the Middle East want to see. But the truth is, what they really want is they want to see the United States reopen the Strait of Hormuz and make it clear to the Iranians that you're not going to be able to close it.
And so what would that look like? In terms of reopening not just the blockade and bleeding them out, but taking the strait by force, what would that look like?
Yeah, so this is the problem. The kind of the easiest answer, but it's not clear it'll work, is just reopening the strait using our naval and air forces. If you remember, about a month and a half ago, we tried this. We called it Operation Project Freedom. And we did it for about a day or so, and then we called it off, but basically because of Iranian counter threats. But that might be a start. The problem is that, too, is very hard to sustain over time. The Iranians will be there forever. At some point, we're going to want to go home. And the Iranians will always use that as a card against our allies. So as you're kind of pointing out, and this is what I was talking about before when I was talking about military escalation, then you get into things like, all right, are we going to put ground troops on the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz, which, would certainly be a great demonstration of our resolve. But now you've got American ground troops in Iran. There's going to be casualties. Very hard to know where that that takes you. And I think it's very clear that President Trump has no interest in going down that road. So this is why we've got ourselves caught in this kind of a dilemma.
Is there, I mean, this has been discussed, and we've discussed on this program with other geopolitical experts too. I mean, the IRGC, I mean, they have these essentially military outposts around the country, and particularly in and around Tehran. Is there a reason that those posts can't be taken out and the IRGC along with them? Is it strictly a matter of projected collateral damage and the sort of the global response to prospect of collateral damage, or what?
So for the first, month and a half, the Israelis were going after all of those things. The Israelis were bombing Revolutionary Guard, Basij, other Iranian internal security force facilities all over the country. And, not just big garrisons. They were going after little checkpoints. They were going after everything they possibly could, really in an effort to try to destabilize the regime, right? To prevent the regime from stopping the people from launching another revolution. And, I'm sure that they killed a bunch of Revolutionary Guards, but at the end of the day, it didn't work. It didn't cause enough pain to the Guard to get them to back down, and it didn't cause enough damage to the Guard and the other internal security forces to enable the people to rise up. Because, remember, at the end of the day, what the regime relies on is a bunch of guys with guns. And, they don't have to be in buildings, and it's very, very hard through air power to kill enough of them to have a real impact.
So is it us putting the restraints on the Israelis, or is it Israel also being unwilling to use special forces to as part of that mission? I mean, is that something, if we wanted to, we could outsource to Bibi?
Really, no. So again, we can keep doing damage to the Revolutionary Guard. It's just not clear that we're ever purely through air power going to be able to have enough of an impact on them. The real issue is having ground forces. Special forces won't do it. Special forces are too small. They can't stay for long enough. Right? The way that you really have an impact through air power is you marry it up with a ground force of some kind. And, what we found is that air power is getting more and more powerful over the course of time, to the point where you don't necessarily need a massive army that's as big and as powerful as your Air Force to get tremendous effect from air power.
Not when you have drones too on the ground, right?
Exactly. But you can. One of the big question marks out there, I think, that the Israelis wanted to do was call on the Iranian people to rise up and then provide them with air support. That can work. That's effectively what the U.S. and NATO did in Libya. So it's certainly possible, but that's the real issue, is you'd have to call on that. And let's recognize if that fails, and probably even if it succeeds, you are going to have massive Iranian civilian casualties, because this regime is going to kill as many people as they feel they need to stay in power. And even if you overthrow them, chances are lots of people are going to die. And it's not at all clear that we can overthrow them even that way.
And I suppose there's an opportunity cost that's substantial, too, with respect, as you say, what our Gulf state allies want, which is our protection against Iranian strikes and also retaliation to back Iran off of them and Iran proxies off of them. At the same time, they want a demonstration of our commitment to prevent Iran from nuclearization, to open the strait. And then we have to deal with the desires of Israel with respect to regime change, which Bibi is much more committed to than Trump is, and what that sort of combination of forces, that ham and egg, would look like. So at some point, even in the region, we get stretched too thin.
Yep, absolutely. No question about it. These would be major military operations. And you're also right that our allies, we and all of our allies have very, very different interests and incentives and what we'd like to see. But that said, at the end of the day, it is going to come down to the United States of America. All of our allies will fall in line once we make a decision. But, as you and I both sketched out now over the last few minutes, the decisions that President Trump have, the options he has, are really terrible. And it's why I understand, why he's really hoping that the blockade is going to succeed, that the Iranians will come around, that it'll put enough pressure on them. That would be the best answer for us. It just seems unlikely.
So, I mean, so that's the ultimately it's if you don't want to expend the resources and risk the exposure of casualties, both, first and foremost, U.S. soldiers and secondly, civilians, then the alternative is patience. I mean, it sort of reminds me, not to dramatize this, but I'm going to dramatize this, or at least by reference. It sort of reminds me of, so the red line in Syria that Obama drew, and this was against the backdrop of the series Homeland, if you remember Homeland, with Mandy Patinkin and Claire Danes and so on. And so they're in Syria and they're talking about, look, here's the situation in Syria, the CIA people. Like, we either turn Raqqa into a parking lot or we continue this stasis that is unsustainable. We continue this back and forth, this whack-a-mole that we're not going to win. We're just going to leave the region the way that it was before we came, and we're going to suffer death and expenditure of resources in the process. So it's to no point, essentially. So you either turn it into a parking lot or you abdicate. And that's where we are with Tehran and the mullahs, with the exception of playing the longer game of the blockade and allowing this regime to fall under their own weight. Is that sort of a rough but maybe appropriate metaphor?
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty nicely, and it's also why I think this could go on for quite some time. I mean, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see this end before our midterm elections. And, I think there's no question President Trump would like to see it end before then, but I think that, for exactly the reasons you just sketched out, he's more likely to let this go. He'll try different things. We could see some escalations between now and then, but I don't think we're going to see anything major, either in terms of concessions or massive military escalation, certainly before the midterms. And then after the midterms, then again, it becomes a question of, all right, well, what's the forcing function, right? Is there something out there that would make the president decide, all right, I got to do this or that, or make the Iranians decide I'm going to do this or that? So it's why this thing could drag on for quite some time.
And so when Trump talks about, pending a deal and trying to make a deal, he just wants to keep that. I mean, he knows you can't make a deal with these people, but he just needs to keep that out there for the appearance of we're trying to work on things, diplomacy. It's not just military. And keep that out there as a possibility, even though it is sort of a facade.
Yeah, so that's certainly true, Dan. I can't speak to whether or not I think the president going into this definitely wanted a deal. Whether he still believes he can get one, I just can't speak to that. But the point that you're making is absolutely valid, that he needs to keep putting it out there for a whole variety of different reasons, both domestic and international, including to the Iranians themselves.
Kenneth Pollack is Vice President of Policy at the Middle East Institute. Kenneth Pollack, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Yep. And Kenneth Pollack joined us in the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Are you turning 65 and thinking about Medicare? Or are you over 65 and haven't enrolled yet because